Started. I just wanted to welcome everybody to Cornerstones. This session, Cornerstones is a platform for DEF to help DEF members gain skills in entrepreneurship, venture capital. For example, we recently did financial modeling. We've done digital marketing. And today we're going to do government contracts, strategy, and insights. The idea of Cornerstones is to help everybody build their skills as entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, and also to fill in experience and knowledge gaps. And so the workshops are in substantive areas, but we'll also do pitch practices to help members that are entrepreneurs do investor pitches, and we're going to start that as well. And then we have other areas like crypto and cyber that may have their own series as well. If anybody has an area where they're very interested in learning about, let me know, and we'll try to get an expert for you in that area. Or if any of you have expertise and want to get out there and get some visibility, let me know, because we obviously prefer DEF members to speak. So today we have a great session for everybody. We have government contracts, which the speakers are Greg Jacobs, who's the chair of the government contract practice at Polsinelli law firm. He's got a lot of experience in government contracts, and Cameron Hamilton, who has been in the field for also a very long time, 20, 25 years, and he's a managing director at FON, Fund Corporate Finance. And his focus is on M&A for government contracts. So he knows the in and outs of growth and what buyers are looking for, and long-term strategy, because often exits for government contractors are in sales. I mean, that's usually the target. We'll have Q&A at the end. And I am Jed Weiner, and I'm the host of this Cornerstone series. And I'm a lawyer with my focus on venture capital and emerging companies. I also lead a platform called GRIP, which means Growth IP, which is a platform that has non-lawyers, lawyers in different specialty areas to help entrepreneurs with fundraising, pricing, all different areas. So I'll turn it over now to Greg Jacobs to take over. Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you very much, Jed. Really appreciate your inviting me to come speak today, and to everyone who's attending, thank you very much for taking the time. As Jed mentioned, I'm the chair of the government contracts practice at Polsinelli, which is a national law firm. We have offices all over the country and practice in a variety of areas. But my specific focus is on government contracts. I advise government contractors at all stages, all sizes, and all industries. But obviously the focus today is on earlier stage companies and the types of issues that typically arise for entrepreneurs and for investors who are looking at getting into government contracts, thinking about, okay, we got our first contract. What do we need to worry about? What are the main legal issues that we're going to face? What are the strategic issues that we need to be thinking about? And for investors who are investing in government contracts and trying to get a sense, where are the legal issues, where are the legal pitfalls? Before I get to the slides, just an anecdotal observation. I've been practicing in government contracts for over 16 years now. And one thing I've noticed during that time is a trend of earlier stage companies becoming involved in government contracts. When I first started practicing, it was very rare for me to be having a conversation as a law firm lawyer with a startup. Most businesses waited until they were more mature to be getting into the government contract space. And I think there are a variety of reasons for that, some of which we'll talk about. But part of it is that I think there are perceived barriers to entry. People worry about significant compliance burdens, significant compliance costs associated with getting a government contract. And I think there's part of that, but the government over time has tried to streamline those compliance obligations to make it easier for earlier stage companies to become involved with government contracts, both because it's good for the economy if there's a broader industrial base, and also because the government wants that innovation. They want companies with new ideas that are relatively new to the market to be willing to look at selling to the government. The government's also the largest purchaser of goods and services in the world. And so, you have a significant opportunity to make money in government contracting. It's a consistent market. It's, if it's not counter-cyclical, it's at least cyclical agnostic typically, and sometimes in difficult times, the government's spending even more, and the government always pays. So there's a great business opportunity for companies that are thinking about getting into government contracting. What I'd like to flag for you today are some of the main issues that I hear about as an outside government contracts lawyer from earlier stage companies and investors when they're getting their first contracts or thinking about getting their first contracts. What are the legal issues? What are the pitfalls that they're looking at? And I think these are important items to keep in mind as you strategize about what it would mean to get your first government contract or get or move more into the world of government contracts. So I'm going to share my screen and pop up the slideshow. Just a little bit about my background there. So I'm going to cover four main topics. I'm going to do them fairly quickly today because we have limited time, and we also certainly want to hear more on the business side of these issues that Cameron's going to present. But the four main topics I'm going to talk about are your basic compliance requirements. What are those initial compliance issues that every government contractor has to worry about? Small business contracting programs, which are typically a great benefit and opportunity for new government contractors, which tend to qualify for those small business designations. Contract financing and assignment of claims from the legal side. I think Cameron will talk about some of the commercial opportunities for financing and funding in his presentation, but what are the main legal issues? I'll talk about that. And then the all-important issue of intellectual property and making sure as an early stage company engaging with the government that you are protecting your intellectual property, which can oftentimes be your greatest asset. I'm going to start with a Dilbert cartoon with the full knowledge that it's not entirely uncontroversial to share Dilbert cartoons these days. The creator of Dilbert has become somewhat of a controversial figure with his political commentary, but I can't help it because I do love this cartoon. If you've never seen it before, it really encapsulates what a lot of early stage companies are thinking about when they are first encountering a government contract and all of the ancillary laws and regulations that become immediately applicable to you as a government contractor. And that's one of the things that early stage companies really need to weigh is this government contracting opportunity important enough to our business to invest in the resources to be able to perform the contract in a compliant way. And we'll talk about what some of those resources are in a minute, but that's really the threshold question. Are we going to make enough money on this contract? Is it enough of a long-term business opportunity for the company to be taking on not just the cost, but the risk associated with the government contract? Because you can read the Washington Post or the legal trade press every week and find another contractor that broke the rules and found itself in significant civil and sometimes criminal liability because the government takes those rules so seriously and compliance can sometimes be challenging. So what do you need to do to get your first government contract? clients sometimes approach us and they say, you know, we think we have a product or a service that the government wants to buy, and we want to get our first government contract. What do we need to do? Well, at the very basic level, you need to be registered in the System for Award Management, or SAM. That is the federal database that allows the government to pay you, which is obviously a very critical component of being a government contractor. Before you do that, you need to obtain a DUNS number and a CAGE code. These systems are designed to be user-friendly and to allow you to complete the registration process fairly quickly. And so sometimes people worry about, is that process going to be confusing? It's not confusing. Most clients are able to handle it on their own, or if they call us, it's for a very simple question. Once you're registered in SAM, you are then eligible to receive government contracts, eligible to be paid by the government, and you are, you know, then you're good to go out and get your first contract. Something else that all government contractors have to do, and this is typically done through the SAM system, is complete a basic set of reps and certs. Those are reps and certs that are about your business. Are you a small business? Are you a small business that has certain types of designations? And we'll talk about what some of those designations are in a couple minutes. And then you're promising or certifying that you are not doing certain things, or that you will not do certain things in the future. For example, you will not use contract funds to lobby the government to get more contracts. You will not use equipment made by certain Chinese telecommunications providers in running your business. And the list is long, and it's something that you need to read carefully. You can't just run through and check the box. Sometimes you have to call a lawyer to get interpretation. Most of it's meant to be pretty straightforward. But the main point to understand here is that the government adds a good number of ancillary policy issues to its contractors. And we'll talk about some of the HR issues in a minute, but things like not using certain telecommunications equipment made by Chinese companies that the government has deemed to be problematic, non-lobbying issues, things that the government, non-discrimination in a variety of forms, things that the government has developed as policies that it wants any company to agree to do or not do before it does business with the government. So get into those contracts knowing that the terms and conditions of the contract will not just be payment of money for the good or service that you're providing. You're agreeing to take on certain policy objectives of the government by being a contractor. There will also be basic compliance requirements that will come along with every government contract. The vast majority of those are what I call negative requirements, and some of those align pretty closely with ethical business practices. So for example, not paying kickbacks, not improperly obtaining competitive information, things like that your company probably knows not to do anyway, but you are agreeing by contract not to engage in. So those are the negative requirements. But you really need to focus on, when you start performing your first government contract, or what are the affirmative requirements? What are the new things that I have to do? And those mostly take place in the human resources area. So there's the equal opportunity clause of government contracts that requires you to take certain steps as an employer to ensure equal opportunity in your workplace. You also have to engage in annual reporting about the composition of your workforce. There's a corresponding requirement with respect to hiring veterans and reporting on your hiring of veterans to the government. And what's critical to know here is that these requirements are periodically audited by the government. So you can take them on and you have to comply with them, The Department of Labor engages in random audits of contractors of all sizes, and I believe it's twice a year, they publish a list of who they plan to audit, and then they will come in and review the extent to which your business is complying with these audits. So it's not simply a matter, complying with these requirements. So it's not simply a matter of, okay, we need to check the box and say we did it. When you take on these requirements, you're going to have to put some process behind it, because there's a chance that you could be audited, and if you fail the audit, could face monetary penalties or the chance of losing your contracts, or at the very least be required to take corrective action. There are also certain practices with respect to whistleblower protections, informing your workforce about whistleblower protections, and other government policies that when you get your first contract, you need to review carefully and make sure that you understand and will comply with. I'll go to the next slide, which is a similar concept, which is, are you ready for your first government contract? You have an opportunity, you think you understand the basic compliance requirements, you have the infrastructure to perform the work. What do you need to be compliant on day one? And here are the basics, and it's designed, again, government contracts can ramp up considerably in complexity based on size, based on the type of contract. Typically, your fixed price contracts, you agree to perform the work for a specific price in advance, are going to be your much less complicated contracts. And so in the small business space, fixed price, particularly if you're providing a more commercial type of good or service, the compliance requirements are relatively low. But the baseline is you want to have a strong set of policies and procedures. You want to be able to spell out in detail how you're going to meet your government contracts requirements. And part of this are the HR procedures that I mentioned before, providing an equal opportunity for employees, regardless of race, gender, et cetera, and doing the required reporting. Others are ethical issues, not paying kickbacks, not paying government employees, or providing them gifts or meals that are over the specified limits for the government ethics rules. It's important not just to comply with those items, but it's also important to document them. And the reason for that is sometimes even the most sophisticated businesses don't follow the rules. And for smaller and earlier stage businesses, that can happen even more frequently. The rules can be complicated. There can be ambiguity in their interpretation. And sometimes you just can't know what all of your people are doing at all times. You can have a rogue salesperson who decides to take the contracting officer out for a $400 dinner. Even if you didn't sign off on that, that's something that can still get your company in trouble. But if you have documented policies and procedures that say, no, our salespeople are not permitted to do that, and they'll be disciplined if they do, the chances of it coming back on the government, on the company as a whole, are really decreased. And it's the same thing with training. Providing a baseline of compliance training. You don't have to hire a law firm or a consulting firm to do that. Certainly, we do some of that work for clients, but there are also commercial training modules that you can purchase relatively inexpensively. So you can say, if there ever is an issue, I've been on the other side of this on quite a few occasions. If there's a government investigation, if there's a compliance concern, one of their first questions are, where are your policies and procedures? Have you done training? Can you provide us the training? And if you've got good answers to those questions, it sets you up to get through that compliance issue or that investigation as a company in the best way possible. As I mentioned, as you get bigger contracts and more complicated pricing, as you get into cost type work, the compliance obligations become much more significant. You things like submitting cost and pricing data to support your contract price, things like complying with cost accounting standards, very complicated, much beyond the scope of our discussion today. But know that as your business grows, as you take on more complicated work and more complicated contracts, you have to invest more in the compliance area. To start with, the baseline of policies and procedures and training should be enough to get you where you need to be to perform your first contract. I want to talk quickly about small business contracting. It's a really important subject. It's one of the real paths to entry for early stage companies, particularly early stage companies that fall within specific government designations. Small business contracting is incredibly lucrative. Businesses who can obtain and maintain a small business status and find a good niche within that area can make a ton of money and do extremely well. Small businesses receive 23% of all federal contracting dollars, so it's billions and billions of dollars every year. What is a small business? That depends on the industry, so you need to understand that carefully. It's based on the NAICS codes. You can Google that and find out for your industry what a small business is, but you have to watch that very carefully. Something else to watch very carefully is the affiliation issue. And this comes in a couple different ways, but it's really important when you're looking at taking on investors or investing in a small business, that you do that in a compliant way that does not disrupt either the size of the business or the designation if the business falls within a particular small business program. And so what affiliation means is that when a small business when a business is considered for size, it is considered both on its own and in connection with all of its affiliates. So you can't have large private equity firms or large defense contractors have a significant stake in a small business and control that small business and have the business actually maintain its size. It's the businesses that are affiliated are considered in the aggregate for small business purposes. So you don't want to invest in a business in a way that would make that business affiliated with the investor or with the other companies owned by the investor. You have to, if there is investment, make sure that it doesn't do anything to change the ownership or control of the business in a way that would disrupt its ability to compete for the lucrative small business opportunities. There are specific programs for 8A. You probably heard of the 8A program before. Those are historically disadvantaged businesses, women-owned businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses is a large and growing area for contracting, and hub-zone businesses as well. So when you're thinking about what's my strategy, what's my marketing strategy, if you have the opportunity to be a small business, and particularly one of those categories, it's a key advantage, but you have to be very careful and thoughtful about how you structure the business from a corporate standpoint, and working with somebody like Jed, who understands those rules and how to structure from corporately the bylaws, the ownership agreements of the business, to ensure that it retains that small business status. Contract financing and assignment of claims. I'm just going to touch on this very quickly. Something that is important, obviously, and I think probably Cameron will talk about this in more detail, but earlier stage companies are looking for opportunities to obtain financing. Certainly can be very expensive to begin to perform your first contracts. Two main types of financing or legal issues related to financing that typically come to me. advance payments that are available through the government, and there are very specific rules for this, but there are opportunities for contractors to receive advance payments on contracts, essentially to have the government help finance the work. And when you go to a third-party financer, oftentimes the lender in that case, often a bank, is looking for an assignment of claims, where the contractor will assign its right to payment under the contract to the bank. There's a very specific legal process that needs to be followed when that occurs. But that's something to be aware of. But that's an option that oftentimes allows early stage companies to use the contracts that they've been awarded as a means to obtain more funding from lenders. And then finally, I want to touch on the issue of IP. This is, as I mentioned before, an important issue for early stage companies because how often that is a most valuable asset. The government, even when it funds IP, normally does not acquire title, but it will obtain varying levels of rights, typically called data rights, in the output of contract performance or in the product or service that's being delivered. And the level of data rights varies widely. At the lowest end, it's commercial rights, essentially the very limited rights that any customer would receive by contract, all the way up to unlimited rights where the government has the right to use the information widely, to provide it to other contractors for their use. And the level of rights that the government receives really depends on the agency, of course, and what its goals are, what its rules are, and oftentimes the funding. Is the contractor bringing the data to the table already, or is the government funding the creation of the data? If the government's funding it, its rights will increase. So what's really important, and what clients come to us on quite a bit, is defining in advance what your pre-existing intellectual property is. What are you as a company already bringing to the table, making sure that that's spelled out really clearly, making sure that it's marked clearly, so there's no question down the line about what the government paid for and what the nature of its rights and data will be. And with respect to patent rights, contractors will almost always obtain the patent rights for inventions that are developed in the course of contract performance, but the government will obtain a license for those patents. Again, very important to understand those rules and to walk carefully through what the requirements are to secure those rights and understanding what the government's long-term rights in the invention will be. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jed and then to Cameron Hamilton, who will take the next segment here.
Great. That was great. It was really on point. It's really appreciated. Cameron, if you want to share your screen.
All right, let's see. Does that show across for everybody?
Yep. All good.
All right. Fantastic. All right. Well, Greg stole a lot of the good points I wanted to make today. So we'll run through this, and I think it's really important we get to make sure we have some Q&A at the end. So, a little bit about us, and we are a relatively new middle market investment bank. We do M&A advisory work, valuation, consulting, and we support investors in the space, focused on the ADG industry. And I won't read the slides. Folks can look us up as you want, or reach out to me afterwards. I've been doing this for 20 some years. I joined a local firm here in DC called the Mclean Group in 2001 when we were 6 people. That September, a small event happened that changed kind of our world as we all know it rather significantly. And I fell into doing government contracting, M&A, and have been doing it ever since. So 20 years in the space, nearly 100 deals. We focus, and I've always focused in what we'll call the lower middle market, kind of $5 to $10 million deals, up to $150, $200 million deals. And where we really do a lot of work is, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, is where folks are particularly good at something for somebody or a set of things for, one particular folks. We tend not to do a lot of the general companies that have been built, if you will, a general IT contractor, but more somebody who needs a story being told and figuring out that fit. And where I want to go with that is, it's never too early to think about what that story you're going to be telling down the road is. And Greg just did a fantastic job kind of laying out a lot of the groundwork you have to think about and prepare for. But just opening those doors and filing the SAMs and DUNS registrations, you should be doing that with an idea of what you're looking to build, so that you can hold yourself and your employees as you grow accountable, whether that's a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, or a 20-year plan. And so with that said, a few things from the investment banker perspective that always come into play down the road. And one of those are, I think it's always important just to hit what is the capital structure you're going to look at. There are, differences between, doing an LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp. Whether you might want to have investors come in is going to determine some of that. How you want to do retention pools for key employees. Do you want a large cap table? Obviously, S Corps have limitations on that. C Corps, you obviously have a tax, kind of a double taxation question and so forth. There's also rules about contract novations, depending upon, at the end of the day, whether you're doing an equity or an asset transaction that can tie into that corporate structure you pick. So some of these things may seem real simple boxes to check early on, but they can be important. And I put this kind of second bullet here because this is a absolutely probably one of the more central things that we deal with every time somebody goes through a sales process. And if you are an owner of a business and you're looking to sell and whether it's immediately or over time transition out, folks want to know that there's going to be continuity of relationships, of technology, of knowledge. And so your key employees and how they are rewarded or retained along the way and post-transaction is a critical part of the structure you're going to build. And depending upon what structure you pick, you have phantom stock, stock options, actual shares, et cetera, all as potential tools depending on what you do. So again, never too early to start thinking about how those might look. I'm going to skip kind of some of the things that Greg already kind of talked about, which are fantastic. I'm going to highlight a couple things down. Just 23% is, as he said, for small business. There are goals for some of the subsets of small business or other pieces. 8A, the disadvantaged veteran-owned is as well as itself. I put in there a couple rules about kind of the net worth and some of the things around setting up as an 8A, which is a separate program from being small business with its own kind of requirements and a time frame around those. One of the 8A differences is you've got a time frame on that through which you have to show progress into at least transitioning into the ability to continue to win full and open work. Whereas technically you can be a small business as long as you meet the small business thresholds of whatever NAICS codes you're in into perpetuity. So a couple different, different things there to think about and so forth. As you get into actually getting ready to go, it's never, perception of what you do is as critical to what you actually do, both in your employees' eyes and in your customers' eyes. So having a very purpose built and thoughtful mission, vision, and value proposition, those are investment dollars in terms of time and energy potentially consulting support that are never badly spent. It is absolutely important to be very clear as to who you are. Don't be afraid to subcontract to build past performance. That is the absolute easiest way to do that. And if you want to be a prime contractor and control your kind of destiny, if you will, as you grow, almost always you got to do that as a subcontractor. And so, network, do your homework, meet folks, figure out who treats their subs well, who doesn't, and build those relationships so that you can work. You can never knock on too many doors. Research, and then think about there's various ways to actually partner with folks. The JV rules are, constantly changing. Mentor proteges are being added agency by agency, and teaming agreements. A lot of the big companies, folks don't necessarily realize that a lot of the big companies need to meet small business subcontracting thresholds. So they're actually looking for good companies to give work to, and just reaching out and making them aware of you can help you. I think it's absolutely important to try. I think a lot of folks want to be everything to everybody initially. That can actually backfire to a certain point. Focus is something that is rewarded in this industry. Being particularly good at something drives equity value down the road. And to do that effectively, it does take persistence and patience. And if I can offer anything of any sort of advice to folks, it is exactly that. There's a phenomenal market out there, as Greg said, in terms of billions of dollars for small businesses. Being persistent, being patient, and staying to what you know how to do and what you do well will get you there. As you grow, there's a couple different paths that are really going to be open to folks. And the first major one is really, are you going to be a services-based company or a technology/product company, or some combination thereof? You will see that services businesses are most of what is actually sold and deals that cross the wire in the tech journal every day or whatnot. Most of those are services businesses. People forget sometimes in their in the desire to come up with the best new cyber product, or the best new radar cloaking device that could go on go on the best new plane that we're doing, that the business of government actually has to go on. And the business of government is a massive business itself. We actually are helping a contractor go through an ESOP process right now, and they support the SBA in just some of its mission work. So providing assistance to small businesses as in resources. Well, start of COVID, the customer called them up and said, we have this small program called the PPP program, and we need to hire over 1,000 people to help support and administer this program. Can you help us? And over the last 8 months of the pandemic, this company has tripled in size to in the 9 figures, purely on the basis of that they did really good work that wasn't that sexy or anybody really talked about, but now they're doing 9 figures and just helping the government do what it needs to be needs to be doing. So remember that services is the bulk of work available for small businesses. In financing a services business, it is much easier as well. You have cash flow being generated from contracts, and usually the big obstacle folks have is how do you finance those first contracts? How do you get the working capital? I apologize, folks. That's my office assistant answering the door. And so with services businesses, as Greg noted, one of the biggest things is getting started. And those assignment of claims, factoring, there are a number of folks that provide services to kind of advance against AR. And that's something that is important for folks to understand. To give folks an idea of what happens that kind of as you get out of hopefully the factoring side of the equation, you're looking for more standard letter, kind of line of credit with commercial banks. A general rule of thumb is about 90% of your under 90 days AR with the company is usually advanceable from a commercial bank. Around 80% of work that is subcontract. And then depending upon the type of contracts you have, if you have, like milestone billing and so you have unbilled AR, usually around 50% of unbilled AR might be funded by a bank. So just to give folks some sense of what, what might be fundable. And so that really takes us to what I want to talk the next couple slides about is, okay, if you're not kind of a standard, professional services business in whatever form or fashion, but you've got an idea around technology or a solution that needs capital, how do you work through that? And I think the first point that I want to make to everybody is that there is a unbelievable amount of non-dilutive equity financing in this space, more so than any other part of the world, because the government itself wants to encourage technology and has a lot of money out there for innovation, whether they are SBIRs, small business innovation research grants, STTRs, research funding from the various DoD organizations, multiple actual kind of government-related, venture capital funding arms, as well as then state and local government funding, or even just tax credit kind of side of the equation. So one of the first things I always like to talk to folks about is absolutely make sure that you're aware of how you might be able to fund your business using the government as your equity investor versus going out to the commercial marketplace, which will take its pound of flesh for the investment. Now, if you're in the in that world that you need that pound of flesh because you've got the product and the growth ahead of you that justifies it. There's a couple different kind of phases of capital usually in a life cycle. The first is kind of the angel round. That's your friends, your families. Sometimes some VCs or consolidations of angels. Those rounds usually are a couple $100,000 to maybe up to $3 million. A seed round, you start looking at a little more organized capital. Those might be up to $5 million. These aren't hard and fast definitions for clearly. And then as institutional investors kind of take over from individual investors, that's where you see kind of the Series A, B, Cs, 5 to 50 and beyond. But laying out how you want to approach your capital structure, kind of two comments there. One is you don't want to raise too much too early, because if you try to get 5 million right up front, you're going to give up more of your company than you need to. At the same time, that has to be weighed with the problem that you can't be raising capital, every 6 weeks, type thing. So you need to make sure you've raised enough capital, give you some runway to go execute. But if you lay that capital needs out with the particular milestones that are going to drive value for your business, generally it kind of puts some inflection points out there that might be the times where you look at these various pieces of financing. So as you go, one of the things that I think is important for folks to understand is that there is in the early rounds, some additional, and Greg was alluding to this. There's a couple different, legal and regulatory pieces. Just offering things to friends and family, to angels or what are called super angels. There are requirements about being accredited investors or waivers from that. I put the current definition of what accredited investor is here. And if you're at all, worried about what, whether somebody might be or not, make sure you have good counsel. Make sure you have the waivers for folks coming in to be able to certify that they are that. Because those are key things, just again to protect yourself down the road as you raise money early on. This ties into a key point Greg made. I want to pull the thread on just a little bit more, but that is the affiliation question. All of those dollars that come into those preference programs that we spoke about earlier are potentially at risk depending upon how you structure these capital investments. The SBA doesn't, Small Business Administration doesn't just look at ownership percentage. It looks at a whole bunch of things that falls under the terms of control and influence. So I'll give you an example. If somebody comes in and invests in you for 10% of your equity, but they have the right to purchase another 50%, that actually can fall afoul. If they have the right to be able to keep you from doing future capital raises, or to determine the price, or to prevent yourself from selling the business in and of itself, there are a number of things that the SBA defines as undue control, and that will actually remove you from the ability to certify as a small business or an 8A based upon those things, even if somebody doesn't own 51% of the business. So again, make sure as you think about those operating agreements with investors that you've had somebody very familiar with these programs. Just take a look and make sure that you aren't inadvertently going to trigger any of those affiliation issues, as well as the control and influence questions. The last thing kind of point I want to make here is just to think about how do you talk about the capital you're trying to raise. And I always like to phrase it in a little bit different in different terms than folks. Most folks always start about here's the reward. And so I think that kind of goes without saying as you're starting to develop a product or a technology or build a business on the potential reward. So I don't think it's actually worth a ton of time to kind of talk about that, because I know you can already articulate that. What most folks forget about, though, is that people are looking to minimize the risk along with maximize the reward. And so you can create as much value for yourself if you don't just talk about how big the reward is, but talk about how you're going to minimize the risk in achieving that reward. So what have you done with the management team? What have you done with the technology? What are your, the competition, so forth. Think about all of the ways that you can show somebody that you have done the planning, foresight, and minimize all things to minimize your execution risk. So I think these are important questions that can really actually drive some value, in addition to all of the slides you'll have probably already developed about the opportunity that exists. And so with that said, let me kind of wrap up here and turn it back over to Jed for any questions that you'd like.
Great. Thank you very much, Cameron. That was great. We do have some questions. Cable Dill, thanks for your question. He asked, can you offer more insight on mentor protege teaming agreements? Just, I guess, high level. I guess that's more for Greg.
Yeah, I'll be glad to. So at a very high level, you start with the basic requirement that only small businesses are eligible to perform small business contracts. And then you look at joint ventures. And the basic rule is that you can only have a joint venture that's able to perform a small business contract if both participants in the joint venture are small businesses. What the mentor protege program does is twofold. The first is it sets up a framework by which a larger business can mentor and will mentor a smaller business in the world of government contracts. So giving that practical hands-on business advice and assistance as a way to help the smaller business, the newer business, along in its contracting process, in its business processes and its business development. The other side of that is when you have a mentor-protege relationship that has been approved by the SBA, the mentor can enter into a joint venture with the small business that's eligible to receive small business contracts. Now, there are very specific regulatory requirements for that, how that has to work, and there are limitations on that, but the benefits are the small business gets real mentoring, and I've seen that program be just an incredible boon and opportunity for small businesses that have really been able to scale and go to the next level of contracting with the help of a larger and more experienced company. So that's the benefit for the small business. And then, of course, the benefit for the large business is that they're able to, as a joint venture, compete for and get business in larger portions of business that they otherwise wouldn't be eligible to receive. So that's the basic landscape of the mentor protege program. I recommend it highly. There's really no downside except for the upfront compliance work that you have to do, and sometimes you want to hire a lawyer to look over everything to make sure you've done it right. But once you've done that, there's really no downside to it, and it can be a real benefit.
And Greg, just maybe two quick points, Cable, to add to mentor proteges are almost always, but they're usually done at a department or agency level. So, and you might look at the mentor protege for Department of State or within the DoD or with wherever. So make sure you're thinking about the mentor protege, and there are slightly different agency requirements for that, but those are usually done kind of on an agency or department type level. On JVs, similar analogy is JVs are usually created. There's some recent regs that just changed it, but originally they were kind of created just for the purposes of actually specific contract proposals. And Greg can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they just changed the rules so JVs can actually now bid on up to 3 contracts instead of just one. So the JVs actually can become significantly, a little bit more powerful, a little more life to them in terms of the T's and C's of getting them set up. So just add those kind of 2 points to that.
Great. Next question is define dilution, please, versus non-diluted equity. This is something I can answer. This means, what's the difference? Diluted equity means that investors are getting shares of the company, equity, so stock. So that means everybody else has a lesser percentage of the company because they're buying shares. Debt and government funding are non-dilutive because the government doesn't get equity. Debt holders, banks who give you loans don't get equity. So it's not dilutive in terms of your share percentage. So that's what that is about, Steve. If you have any other questions on that, let me know.
And Steve, just to maybe add that to a great example of that within the government and why it's so important is, the commercial world, you might need investors to get your proof of concept out, right? You need a couple $100K to build that proof of concept. Well, you write a white paper to DARPA, and DARPA might give you that couple $100K for that proof of concept, and that doesn't require any shares, anything, and that's along the list of many of those organizations or parts of agencies that I mentioned. And so, non-dilutive funding in the government is really them giving you those dollars that you might get from investors for particular milestones, but not having to actually give up any equity for it.
And most people prefer, obviously, not to give up any equity. So non-dilutive funding is generally better. The only difference, the only time it could be advantageous is if you want your investor to kind of be a partner to help you. So it's worth getting diluted if the investor really adds a lot of value to your business. Anything else? I think that's all. We got really good feedback from people already in the Q&A. Thank you for that feedback. Otherwise, I'll wrap it up. And we'll have a presentation on IP strategies for venture capital and startups next week. The invitation's on LinkedIn for that, and it will be sent out to certain people who've already attended. So we look forward to you joining then and spread the word. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much to our great panelists. We did a great job.
Thanks, everybody.